In the summer of 2020, in the context of the protests, the title just came to me. I mean, America was on fire then, and it just seemed like we've been on fire since the 1960s, if not well before. I'm Elizabeth Hinton, author of America on Fire, The Untold History of Police Violence and Black Rebellion Since the 1960s. The book shows why the post-civil rights turn to policing, surveillance, and incarceration as urban policy is one of the biggest domestic policy failures in the history of the United States. Beginning with the first kind of incident of mass political protests in Harlem in 1964, after a 15-year-old high school student was killed by an NYPD officer, Lyndon Johnson called this collective violence, throwing objects at police, burning buildings and looting stores as a riot, something that was completely criminal and meaningless. In labeling this form of political violence, this form of protest, a riot, we have been trapped since the 1960s in this policy cycle where then the only solution becomes more policing. Federal policymakers and officials at all levels of government failed to address the root causes that led people to feel that they had no other recourse but to embrace this form of protest. The Crucible years of Black Rebellion, as I call them, really in the late 60s and early 1970s, were in response to the expansion of police forces and targeted communities of color. In Miami in 1980 and LA in 1992, rebellions emerged in those cities in response to the acquittal of a group of police officers for an incident of police violence. With Rodney King, the first kind of viral video of police violence that was shown on the nightly news for nearly a year constantly. The officers involved were acquitted by a jury, and those acquittals led to particularly brutal and destructive rebellions. And even now with Michael Brown and George Floyd and beyond, it's not, the breaking up of a house party that's causing this form of collective political protest to emerge. It is in response to, incidents of police violence that just cannot be denied and that galvanize people across the nation to say this form of policing has to end. In many ways, the launch of the war on crime, Lyndon Johnson's call for the war on crime in March 1965, was very much in response to the threat of Black rebellion. And the idea was, if we can expand police forces in communities of color and militarize those forces, then this will somehow serve as a deterrent. The strategy was to find people, especially young people, before the riot began or before they committed a crime. It wasn't based on actual crime that happened, but potential criminals in low-income communities of color, searching for potential criminals and arresting them and removing them from the community. And in middle-class and suburban communities, policing is about protecting property and protecting residents from outsiders. Alternatives are consistently presented to policymakers at all levels of government. Think about Kerner Commission that Lyndon Johnson called in the middle of the rebellion in Detroit in 1967 to evaluate the causes and come up with solutions to prevent unrest in the future. The Kerner Commission said, if we're serious, we have to go well beyond the war on poverty. We need to create jobs for low-income Americans. We need a complete overhaul of public schools. We have to provide people with decent housing. And the Kerner Commission also recognized the role of white racism. These recommendations were ignored. Policymakers, both conservatives and liberals, have been really resistant to investing the resource to bring about the kind of transformation that will more equitably redistribute resources and disrupt the racial hierarchies that have defined the United States historically. The biggest takeaway of America on Fire is that if we are serious about addressing these problems, we have to move beyond police reform. We need robust prevention programs that allocate resources to jobs and to improving access to housing and healthcare opportunities. If that kind of structural transformation would have been realized then, would George Floyd still be with us today? Would we be a more racially egalitarian society? And the only way we're going to get there is if we actually begin to invest in social welfare programs for people who need it most.